Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm looking forward to the holiday season. I'm going to put up our Christmas lights when the weather is good.
Yep. Get them up.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, so I don't have to freeze my fingers.
Nope.
It's going to be some nice days.
Or tip over in a snowbank or anything like that.
Exactly. It's a good time. And looking forward to putting up our Christmas tree. Mary and I just love the Christmas and the holiday season. So I'm especially looking forward to today's guest.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Christmas trees, Don, how do you know when a Christmas tree has a big date?
I don't know.
It gets all spruced up. Did you hear about the Christmas tree that looked sick?
No, I can't say I have.
It had tinselitis. Oh, so the weather outside is not frightful at all, but we've got a guest here who's most delightful. And since we are in the holiday season, we wanted to talk about Christmas trees. And who better to talk about trees than Eric Baker of Baker Garden and Gift? So, Eric, you are the third generation of bakers in the company, correct?
That is correct, yeah. No, I'm third generation, and we've been at our South University location, which is right across the street from the bowler. But 1959, 1960 was basically the first year. And
I bet at that time you were almost the edge of Fargo, I bet.
Yeah.
The south edge.
That was the property district to the line there. And different times. You know, we have the original building, which is kind of hard to imagine, but we have some good pictures.
No, you're practically in the middle of town. Almost.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of times, people are kind of referring to Midtown now.
Yeah, exactly.
New way of looking at it. So. Yeah, no, it's exciting that to be around the center of town, and we got a lot of traffic there. So
that was started by your grandpa, right?
Yep, that was started by my grandfather Harry.
Okay.
And my dad got involved with it, and when I finished up school, I followed suit there. But we have a lot of history with Christmas. In fact, a lot of times people. They'll say the memory trigger is, that's where we get our Christmas tree, you know what I mean? And they may not buy plants every single year, you know what I mean? Like bedding plants and trees and shrubs, but trees, for Christmas is generally and we've been doing it the same way for such a long time, getting them from the same kind of location in the United States. So it's really a memory trigger for a lot of people growing up. So.
Well, it is, because buying a Christmas tree is such a tradition. And so, yeah, exactly. So people don't want to just buy just anywhere. They like to go where they've had that tradition of buying.
Yeah, it's fun this time of year when people come and shop for trees, and they walk into the area in which we're selling trees, and then the smell comes to them.
Oh yeah,
and it's almost like it's like a sigh of relief. They're like, oh, I love the smell. And
it's an all-natural smell. It's not like a restaurant where they pump out the burger smell or something like that.
And not an evergreen of a spray bottle.
No,
aerosol.
No. This is all natural.
You can't
buy
that smell.
So when do you remember the first year that you started working there selling trees, or what was that? What was that like?
I was in high school, and definitely, back in the day, we sold a lot of trees. Back in the day, we still flock trees, where we put the flock on them, and hundreds and hundreds of those flock trees. And I think that was a powerhouse. They would just, we would sit down and prepare those trees, and they get flocked, and that was quite the thing back in the day. But interesting side note, Baker used to be a dealership for snowblowers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
There's some great Jacobson brand, and there's some great pictures where they have a whole bunch of Jacobson snowblowers lined up right on University.
Do you still have a Jacobson?
No. No. So, they just like nurseries, they have a tendency to do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And, Christmas trees is something that's been always part of, from my memory, from the early on, I should say. So.
Well, now, what about the trend towards artificial trees? I mean, my wife and I put up a real tree. We wouldn't be without it. But, and of course, I've written about the kind of the debate between real Christmas trees and artificials. And of course, for some people, if they're in an apartment or a condo that doesn't allow a real tree, there are good reasons for some people putting up an artificial tree. But for real tree people, there's no substitute. But how has that affected the Christmas tree, the live Christmas tree, real Christmas tree business?
The industry as a whole has been steady. Slow and steady wins the race. And there's been a huge peak back during COVID. I think there's a lot of people getting fresh trees, because they weren't able to be out and about. And there's a lot of families that were having more than one Christmas, so, everybody would kind of stay in their house. But I think, their Christmas trees, artificial, we used to sell quite a bit back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s. That was kind of a thing. Technology was getting better, and, we kind of, got into that. But then, LED lights came along, and, people, the trees last a little bit longer. But, fundamentally, we decided to kind of walk away from it because, there is an environmental impact. Even though one is not, cutting a tree down when they have an artificial tree, but the economic or the ecological problem is that they end up, throwing them away after so many years anyway. People get frustrated.
Yeah, because I think and I've done a little research when I've written garden columns on this, and I think the average artificial tree in the United States is probably kept around 10 or 11 years, which means then it ends up in a landfill. They're not decomposing.
Right.
They aren't
it's all
compostable.
It's plastic, or is
right?
it some
and
other
many
kind
of them are, they're shipped long distances from other countries.
Oh, absolutely.
And, it's interesting, too. Do you know what the origins of the first artificial Christmas tree? It was a toilet brush maker.
Oh.
Yeah, toilet brush maker. The first artificial trees used to have quite long bristles, and very similar to a toilet brush, dyed green. And so that's sometimes when I like to debate with some of my artificial tree people, I say, well, you know what the origin of that artificial was?
Well, some of those old trees are really chic now, like the old aluminum and very tinsely, and they're also
kind of a retro look.
But they're also, if you can find one, they are very, very pricey. So it's you're not necessarily, and they're very fragile too, as I recall. But so you're talking about like that when people walk in, just them being hit by that aroma of the trees. What would you say is kind of like the most popular Christmas tree, and why is it the Fraser fir?
Yes.
What is the ideal tree, and why is it the Fraser fir?
Yes, the Fraser fir is come onto to its own in the sense of being the leader in the industry, mostly because it's a fir and it releases a lot of very pungent, evergreen, and it does last. Now we get our trees from North Carolina. They can be grown throughout the United States. In fact, Minnesota grows quite a number of Fraser firs, but down in the Appalachian mountain range, there, it's just ideal growing conditions for these trees, and so. They store well. They're full. They don't have the quintessential bad side like sometimes you see, on more northern grown trees. But they're just a joy to be around. You know what I mean? Just because
for so many people, I hear with the Fraser fir that they love it because it's the traditional Christmas tree. When we have an idea in our head of a Christmas tree, a traditional type, if there is one, the Fraser fir is really that traditional Christmas tree, isn't it? When we vision, most of us.
I think so. I mean, it's way back in the day, balsam fir, which is we're still in the fir family, and you can get some of that same pungency with that as well. And I think before Fraser was super popular, balsam fir, which a lot of wreaths and roping is still made out of nowadays. But balsam fir has also been, always would drop needles, even before they dried out. You know what I mean? So I think there's a little bit
and the Fraser fir are so fun to decorate. They've got branches that are spaced almost ideally. They're usually firm enough; they'll hold the decoration.
They're sturdy.
They're easy. Hey, Eric, do you remember the 1960s? The tree that was in vogue, the Norway pine, which is the long-needled pine.
Oh yeah.
And that was kind of in the 1960s, maybe early 70s. That was the tree in fashion. Hard to decorate, though, those long needles. And someday, for anybody not familiar with Norway pine, look it up. Very long needles, but hard to get decorations kind of nested onto those long needles.
You kind of had to
even longer needle than Scotch pine.
Hold the branch almost in and pull it close, kind of into a fist,
slip that.
And then try to put an ornament over that. Yeah, they were not easy.
And then following that, the Scotch pine, right? They were very popular in the 70s, 80s. Prickly needles, though. They were short, they not as short as Fraser fir, kind of between the Norway pine, Fraser fir, but prickly needles.
Well, the interesting thing about pines is that they naturally lose their inner needles, So when you have 2 and 3, 4-year-old needles, they get shaded by the branches on the outside. And so then and so sometimes when people would buy those Christmas trees and they have not been shaken out, people would notice all these dry, brown needles, and that's just Mother Nature to a certain extent. It is a fact, though, and it's nothing wrong with a natural pigment-based substance that they spray onto Scotch pine and Norway pine, if they, still people able to find that. And
to keep them green.
To keep them green, yeah.
Yeah, because the natural color during the fall, winter, they get kind of a lighter green, just natural, but it's not quite as deep green. And of course, the Fraser fir don't get with color applied, do they? I think
no. They're totally natural.
Yeah.
And their needles have kind of a silvery undercast on it. You know what I mean? So depending on how you're looking at it, the needles are on the individual branches seem to be a little perky, which is just the perfect little mechanism to hang an ornament. You know what I mean? So if that tree has not been designed, any better, I would say.
Another thing that is so awesome about the Fraser fir is the straightness of the trunk. The Scotch pine are noticeable for a very crooked, wavy trunk. And if you try to get a Scotch pine in a Christmas tree stand and get it to stand up.
That was, I remember that's what my dad used to get was old pines like that. And we would have to put screws into the baseboard of the wall, eye screws into the baseboard of the wall. And then we'd kind of lash the tree on because the tree was in a corner. And then we would have a stand. And these were an old stand where an actual pan was on the bottom. Sure. So probably not very good on carpet. But yeah, they were always, and you'd have to twist and turn it to find the right area. But yeah, you put in a Fraser fir, and you just pretty much, as long as you get it upright in the stand, it's gonna.
Oh, the straightness of the trunk is just awesome.
You were talking a little bit about like with the pine, sometimes you tamp them down on the ground. So is the tamping on the ground, is that kind of a ritual when people come in to shop for trees? Is that kind of like kicking the tires of a car, or does it actually tell you something?
Well, and it kind of goes back to, a lot of times everybody has their own kind of methodology of seeing if there's a good tree or not a tree. A lot of times people will grab branches and kind of, try to, run their fingers through some of those branches. And if you find needles that are green and they're coming off, that's a maybe indication of things have dried out. You know what I mean? So, a tree is obviously cut down and it loses the ability to bring up moisture. And that's one of the reasons why eventually, we'll talk about putting a fresh cut on that tree. But that's a good, good methodology. Again, depending on how you're shopping, those pines can have the old needles in there, and that's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? But again, firs are generally, they'll hold on to their needles all the way into the center of the branch. I mean, even on the oldest part of that tree, way at the base, you'll see little sprigs of needles that were actively growing. You know what I mean? So they're made to really hold on to everything for the year.
So when you were talking about cutting up a little bit on the tree branch or the trees after you bring it home, let's talk a little bit about maintenance. So like once you get a tree home, you don't just right away put it in the tree stand, right? I mean, some people, like we used to keep our trees in the garage until about the middle of December, till the 15th or 18th or so, and put them up. And obviously now some people want to put them up earlier. What's a good window for putting a tree up?
Well, one has to really look to see how long they want to leave their tree up. So a lot of people's Christmas goes right into January, you know what I mean? So, then of course you might want to wait a little while, wait into December to put it up. Some people are leaving town on the 23rd and they want to enjoy it as much as they can, so they might put it up the day after Thanksgiving. So there's always a window of opportunity. But the nice thing about trees is that, they're already cut. My pro tip is, there's nothing wrong with, picking out a tree a little bit early. You can certainly bring it into your garage. Hopefully it's cool, not heated, not in front of a fan or anything. And then have that ready ready to put up into your stand. I would normally recommend, bringing that tree in, letting it warm up a little bit, you know what I mean? Maybe bring it in the morning, you're going to do it in the afternoon. And you'll get everything ready. You'll get your stand, you'll get a pail of water ready to go. And of course, you'll like to do a fresh cut And what I mean by that is, the bottom inch or two, a little bit more is better than a little bit less, and we're going to make there's different strategies. I'll let Don chime in on should we do a straight cut or should we do a slight angle cut? I'm more of a straight cut kind of person. With these modern stands, there's good ways for them to be elevated off the bottom of the stand.
Usually they don't sit flush on the ground. There's usually a little something down there that keeps them up off. So, I agree with you, Eric. A straight cut, I think, is perfect. They'll sit up over the bottom.
You can make that fresh cut. You can put it into the tree and set it and get it all straight the way you need it to be. And the interesting thing is that tree is waking up again a little bit. And, of course, we'll put fresh water in it right after we put it up,
What Mary and I do is exactly the way you suggest. We shop early. So the selection's good. And then we leave it out in the unheated garage, out of the sunlight and out of the wind and everything. Keep it where it's cold. And then we bring it in. Maybe set it up the night before so the branches relax, and then right before we bring it in the house, we give it the cut like you suggest or recommend, and of course that is a must, isn't it? That's really a must. It's not just a recommendation; it's a must. And so we give it that fresh cut and immediately get it in water. Water stand, and let it relax overnight, and then decorate it the next day. And excuse me, with our Fraser firs, we've over the years put them up first week in December, and then we keep them up until after January 6th, which is a traditional Epiphany, and they're wonderful. Sometimes we even hated to take it down January 6th.
The amazing thing about all these firs is that, there are a lot of sap and a lot of sap flow. And so most people are surprised how much water that can take up.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Every stand is a little different, but I would like to challenge someone to really stay on top of watering or keep that tree watered for the first, 7 days, because when you get a good tree and it's actively growing and you did everything right, that thing can really take up a lot of water to the point where people are like, gallons.
And that's why a good water reservoir stand is so important, because we actually check ours and add water usually morning and evening.
Yes.
On that to make sure that the water never goes below that cut surface, because it can kind of seal itself over and they might not drink as much. And if they don't drink as much, then they don't have so much internal moisture.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times people will say, once in a while we'll get a dud of a tree. And what generally has happened is that the water had gone dry, no one fesses up to it. And they'll quickly put more water in it and expect for it to kick back on. It's kind of like an engine, and it runs out of fuel. You put more fuel in it, it just
might not restart.
It doesn't restart right away. You have to do something to it. So, and, occasionally we'll get some calls about mid-season for Christmas trees, and they'll say, my trees stopped taking a little bit of water, and that's fine. And I recommend this, and it's kind of like an internal hack, and when the tree is all decorated, and of course, no one's going to take that down and put another fresh cut on that. But sometimes if you go down there with a real sharp utility knife, while it's still in the stand, and and if you can nick off a little bit off the side of that tree, it's almost like you're peeling an apple. Just a little sliver along the base, and you're not going all the way around. You're just kind of doing it in 3 or 4 spots. But that will open up some of the capillary tissue.
That's a great idea.
The capillary, and it's not a bridge, but it allows. It's like making a little small fresh cut, and if that gives you another week's worth of time with the tree, that's great.
Because like you say, if it quits drinking water too early, none of us are going to take down undecorated at all, give it a fresh cut, put it up. But your idea of exposing some of that lower side tissue will allow it to drink up water again.
And that's right at the base, So
right at the base, sure.
For the most part,
so it's under the water. Yeah, going to be under the water level.
Exactly. Most people will be cutting essentially in the water, because that's where you'd want to do it. So 7, 8 inches up. Tip. 7, 8 inches up, not so much.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Other concerns we've had with some of these firs, especially the bigger ones, sometimes you can see a fissure, a crack. And that's usually not a structural thing. But a lot of people get concerned. They'll be filling up the tree and they'll notice a crack. Just like a brand new piece of lumber. Sometimes lumber can crack or split. But they have their use is going to be limited. So again, not a structural thing. And
have you ever heard of people, and I've seen it with my own eyes, not our tree, but I've seen other people. Have you ever seen people that their Fraser fir rooted during the time that they had it up?
No.
Yeah, that actually started producing some little side roots. I mean, not such that you could take and plant the tree, but I mean, started some little, I think they're called adventitious little side roots coming out of the woody trunk below water level. Again, not to make yourself a new tree, but it kind of interesting.
The only
tree
mystery
was happy.
I got a funny side story. The only interesting thing, a long time ago, we had a customer that bought Fraser fir from us, and she was like, we put it up, and like the next morning or short period thereafter, she noticed all these insects around the base of her tree, and so of course, we were right on top of it. We're like, whoa, we never know. It's, they've grown out in the forest, So we sent a crew person over and with a shop vac, and he quickly kind of shop vac'd a lot of these. He brought one back, and guess what kind of insect it was?
What's that?
Praying mantis.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is the...
So that's Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So I didn't really think that would be able to survive in the cold, but maybe.
Well, they doing some research. They come in this kind of cocoon kind of thing.
Okay.
So it might have hatched out then.
And so, it hatched out.
Sure.
Yeah, it had gone dormant for the year, and we do sell beneficial insects at the nursery, ladybugs and such, but we have sold praying mantis, I don't know, egg sacs, if you will.
Sure.
And people emerge and put that in, they emerge out, and they kill insects that we don't want.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Now, I don't know about for a Christmas tree, but, it was an exciting time for that.
Well, we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, more talking to Eric Baker about Christmas trees.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, we're back. We're talking about Christmas tree and Christmas tree care with Eric Baker of Baker Garden and Gift. So let's talk about some of the things like let's talk about user error, the things that'll lead to a downfall of a tree. You said, would you say number one is just lack of watering? Or less than sufficient watering.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll just say no fresh cut. I mean,
they
put a fresh cut on it, and then, they brought it home, and an hour and a half later they put it in water.
Right. Let the water go down in the meantime below the cut surface.
But it is definitely water related, and and for some people, if it's a new house or they tried it in a different corner and they have a heat register, that blows out air.
So dry.
Dry
drying, warm.
Air, These trees are normally going to be drying out. That's just Mother Nature.
So what about like with the water? I think like at times in the 80s when we had a real tree, a live tree, we would water it, and sometimes we were told to put a little 7-Up in there. Is that kind of maybe not old wives' tales or wishful thinking, but are there any preservatives that you can add to water, or are you just better off just doing straight H2O?
I think good clean water, and another pro tip here. Sometimes warmish water, not boiling or anything.
Okay, good point.
So you're pulling your tap out. You know what I mean? Maybe it's a little bit on the warm side, and that just softens tissue, kind of gets things going. But it's preservatives are really kind of like keep the water clean. I don't advocate any solvents or bleach. You know what I mean? But the preservatives that you buy are not necessarily going to give the tree nutrients. A lot of people think that it's going to be feeding the tree, you know what I mean? But I embrace the idea that it's just, keeps the water clean. But once you get stagnating water, then...
and that's a great point, because the stagnating water can plug the pores of the tree with bacteria and fungi. And there's a lot of research been done on these different additives, aspirin, bleach that you mentioned, Eric, 7-Up in the water. And there's the research has shown that that a lot of these things can actually work against freshness of the tree. Sugar in the water, things like that. That some of these materials can actually plug the pores and interfere with the water uptake. And so there's danger in doing that. So university-type research that has been done on these things advocate, number one, like you say, Eric, fresh water. Never let it go below. And the commercial tree preservatives have a little more science behind them in keeping that water fresh and pure and free of bacteria and things. So rather than kind of experimenting and putting a little 7-Up or an aspirin tablet and, is it too much? Is it too little? That can be dangerous. So plenty of free water, and there's some science behind using the commercial preservatives.
What about, we always had the Christmas tree stands that had the screws in on the side. You had the kind of you'd kind of wind them in. Is there a danger? Can you screw into a tree too much? Can you damage the trunk and do some damage there? But that'll affect the tree's life, and it'll kind of shorten its vibrancy and its stay.
No. The little bit of that peg that it creates, by no means will, diminish the amount of the water that can be taken up.
Right, because there's plenty of tissue around that is still tight. Because I screw those in good and solid.
Oh, yeah. I sometimes will tell, and then when you got it nice and tight, take your pliers to them and do it a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Okay. Much less apt to tip.
Yeah. The worst case scenario is that things are tipping, and then you got all kinds of other things going around.
Then the whole thing's going over anyway.
I enjoy putting up the Christmas tree. And it's funny. One reason I enjoy putting up the live Christmas tree, because I figure if our marriage can survive putting up that Christmas tree, we can weather almost anything. So I'm always underneath. I mentioned to Mary, now hold it good and straight. And then I'm down there adjusting the screws. And it's fun. It's a nice tradition. Mary and I enjoy it.
What would you say? Is our Fraser firs? Is that the bulk of what you sell there at Baker?
Yes, I think with the supply demand of trees, and it goes into a little bit of economics with the Christmas tree industry as a whole. So pre-COVID, numbers were kind of flattening out as far as fresh trees. And interesting enough, when I've talked to other growers, it's sometimes kind of a labor thing. We used to buy quite a number of trees out of the Pacific Northwest. Grand fir, noble fir. They have some really interesting Canaan fir. All these great trees out of the West Coast, but all these growers are slowly just diminished because they just don't have the workers, to hold and maintain these trees. And so it's North Carolina, has been a hotbed for that, and I think they must grow them at a little better capacity, a little faster. You know what I mean? And,
Eric, that brings up a good point that occasionally I hear people say, "Oh gosh, it's a shame that all these trees were cut down for Christmas trees. Such a shame to see those trees." Go and only for maybe a month of use. But, it's interesting. As you mentioned Christmas tree growers. Christmas trees are a crop. It takes, Eric, 7 to 10, 11, 12 years to produce a Christmas tree. Okay, but they're specifically planted for a crop on plantations. If it wasn't for Christmas tree the Christmas tree market, these trees wouldn't have been planted in the first place. So it's not like people are going out into the wild and cutting trees down.
Which, by the way, you probably shouldn't do.
And so anyway, these are a specific crop. So we don't need to cry over the Christmas trees any more than we would cry over a field of wheat that's been harvested.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, from these 5 to 12 years, those trees are supplying oxygen. They're giving wildlife protection. They're covering ground. And they're giving a livelihood to Christmas tree farmers. And so I think it's important, too, that we understand that these are a great crop. But we don't need to be sad when the trees are cut.
I just kind of a question about that. I just thinking about this now that, as it is a field, and that after, let's say, let's call it a harvest. So after the trees are cut down, there are still the stumps there and the root systems there. Do they have to go through, do they have to go through and grind up the stumps and grind up the field and then turn over the field and then start again? Because I'm sure that they do this so that they probably have a number of fields so that it's staggered, so that every year, 1 year is being cleared and then the next year we'll move over this one. I'm sure it's a whole operation, but do you know how they go through and dig up the stumps?
I've never thought of that.
There are some, I've seen a piece of equipment that is specifically made to and it's just a juggernaut of a machine that just comes in and just lifts up, grinds, and it's almost like, it just resets that whole land. And some people say for every tree that's harvested, 5 to 7 have been planted to replace that.
Yeah.
And it's I'm sure they leave some, trees natural to a certain extent, but they typically I think they let that field settle and then they'll replant subsequently. And a lot of these areas in which they're planting, it's not like they're stealing farmland. It's a mountain, hillish, range, and so they have different strategies as far as how to plant that. But it becomes pretty mechanical, and
I'm sure they have a game plan. I'm sure they're not going into this just all kind of willy nilly and flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, no, it's very very well orchestrated.
Yeah.
I mean, when they're doing that for a living, and a lot of tree growers. Surprisingly, there's a lot of private homeowners, that do stuff, and they, just like farming. Back in the day when there was thousands and thousands of farmers, there's thousands and thousands of tree growers. And there's people that will come and harvest them for them, and it's a. I got to make a trip down North Carolina. I mean, I heard it's just beautiful.
Great reason.
That would be
Great
fun
reason
to
to
see
go.
those. And that's where most of the Fraser fir come from.
The majority of them. And,
that'd be fun to see.
Three state area where a lot of them come from, But, and again, every part of the United States has a little different, local trees, And you can still find local tree growers here, even close to Fargo-Moorhead, where you can go cut your own. They might be a pine, or occasionally someone will try to sell a spruce, and spruce are heavy trees, hard to put up, and they will certainly drop needles. So spruce are a little bit of a tough one to.
When I was a kid in the 50s, we bought our Christmas tree from the Texaco gas station in Lisbon, and they were spruce, short-needled spruce, and they lasted about a week indoors, and then the needles would all drop. We enjoyed
Those
them
are
for a
sharp
week.
needles.
That's all we knew.
Yeah.
And we liked them, but short-lived.
So if the Fraser fir is the Cadillac of Christmas trees, what would be the Lincoln? Like what's it? Not to say a step down, but like what would be one that maybe would be more affordable, but maybe not quite as nice, but have some of the same feel, but maybe not quite, the
I think
Fraser
it would
fir.
be Scotch pine would probably be the thing that some tree growers are continuing to grow, or maybe going back to that balsam fir. The balsam fir would have the more look and feel of it, but again, just kind of lower.
Yeah, and don't hold their needles quite as long as the Fraser, but yet you get a good aroma. And
how many different kinds of trees do you stock?
We've, with the supply demand of trees, we've had a hard time finding trees. And so we've been really focusing on Fraser fir. Back in the day, we would carry quite a number of trees, but we even had a hard time finding white pine, which is a very loose.
Yeah. Is that what they call Norwegian pine?
No, well, there's Norway pine.
Okay.
And so white pine has a very light needle, almost to the point where you can't hang anything.
It's like a feather almost.
It's almost feather-like.
Yeah, very light. Yeah, soft needles. Beautiful trees. A little hard to decorate because the branches don't hold the decorations. They tend to kind of flop downward. But they're a pretty tree.
And so we've just been focusing on trees that people are liking, and I've talked to suppliers, and a lot of times the trend in the last few years is that they'll confirm what we've bought from them in the past, but you can never, or it doesn't feel like you can ever add to it. So their industry is kind of holding their own. And when we have a big burst during COVID, it's hard to rebound from that. Like you had said, 5 to 7 years. You just can't magically show up with more trees. 3 or 4 years later. So it'll be interesting to see in about 5 years from now if there's going to be an excess. And so maybe prices will come down. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of variables. Freight, getting them here. But I like Don's point about shopping early because it's always nice to not be scrambling, looking for a Christmas tree. And there's usually enough trees around, but, there's a couple of years where, people sell out.
And trees, Christmas trees have to be cut at a certain point, don't they, in the fall? When the sap is in the tree good, and they have to be, so delaying buying doesn't mean you're getting a fresher tree.
Exactly. Yeah. No one's holding back on trees
right.
now.
They cut them at a certain point that they need to be cut, And so, by delaying, you're not getting a fresher tree.
So here we are. We're talking about this. We're 1 week out from Thanksgiving. I take it you've already got trees in stock?
Yes.
What will be like your biggest day for Christmas tree sales, would you say?
Well, in the past, traditionally, it's been kind of like Black Friday. You know what I mean? People, I think, honestly, I think people go out and, I suppose, find the deals. Like
a lot of people have time off probably too. Families in town.
And so we do find that being a pretty busy day. Some of it is kind of weather related. When we have the warmer temperatures, it's sometimes people are just not in the mindset. You know what I mean? I remember years where, well, you know how Thanksgiving is. You know what I mean? You could be wearing winter jackets or you could be practically in T-shirts. You know what I mean?
And the date varies almost by a week, almost, doesn't it? We have early Thanksgivings and a little bit later by almost a week.
So if we've had snow on the ground right now, I think we'd be getting calls and,
it's that does put you in the mood. A little bit of snow on the ground, then that does put you in the mood.
You used a word earlier, excess, and you weren't using it in the terms of what I'm going to ask necessarily, but it got me thinking. What do you do if you have leftover trees?
What we do at Baker?
Yeah.
1 year, I remember this many years ago, we did a big promotion and we subsequently bought in a whole bunch of extra trees. Thinking that we're going to sell a lot. And we had a lot left over. Promotion wasn't as good as we thought. And so I got creative and I was like, I bet we could rent one of those, like the tree shredding, like the City Fargo has, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I thought, for making soil mixes for shrubs and perennials the next year, we can put that through there. And
lots of good mulch.
Yeah, very good mulch. The pine bark, it just the aspect of what that is, it's really premium for what we use in the spring. And I was amazed to see it was over 100 plus trees put through that thing, surprisingly down to hardly anything. And then of course you can't use those chips fresh, so then you have to let them compost. And with all this effort and energy that we put into it, eventually I discovered this pile which was as big as the table that we're sitting around right now. It just felt like it just got down to nothing.
Well, there's a lot of air in between those branches.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I know the city has a recycling program. Though I might challenge people, as a quick side note here, when you're done with your tree inside, there's nothing wrong if you have a spot in the back of your yard, you can undecorate your tree and cut off a few of the bottom branches, and if we have some snowbanks, go put it in front of your picture window in the back, and it could be a nice habitat for birds. People will heard some, maybe, it's always nice to have a habitat, and, if it's not terrible looking, it's going to continue doing its thing, and you might appreciate it. That's just beside. Some people like to get it on the curb so the recycling, the city will come and take and, recycle them for you, you know what I mean? But
another side note on that too, a person could prune off the branches, and if we haven't had a lot of snow, use those branches as a protective mulch over some, a tender perennial. I could do that over my mums that I want to winter.
Yep. And
then save the log, put that beside the garage and use that for campfire in the spring or summer. So it doesn't necessarily mean we need to dispose of them. Yeah, and like you mentioned, Eric, I've heard people set them out beside their picture window and put different bird seed, bird type, suet and different things in it and use them as a wildlife catch. So good idea.
Well, and also I think now, where we are in Fargo, maybe not so much, but I think, once you get closer to lakes area, a lot of people will just bring or I shouldn't say a lot, but I've heard of people who will just bring their tree out onto the ice. And then once not in a way that would be in any kind of like snowmobile or truck traffic for ice houses or things like that. But if you put it in an area where once the snow melts and the ice melts and it drops into the water, it can become kind of, again, a habitat for fish and for aquatic.
Right. And I've heard of a wildlife club a number of years ago that did take the leftover Christmas trees and put cement blocks on them and sunk them down in. Now, I don't know if that's anymore, if that's Minnesota DNR. I don't know if that's
clearance on that.
A thing anymore, so one would need to check that out. But hey, Eric, one thing I want to hear about is when we talked about preserving Christmas trees, keeping them fresh, I want to hear a little more about the flocked Christmas trees.
The F word.
Yeah, the flocked Christmas trees. I want to hear a little more about that and keeping them fresh, etc.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, good.
make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back. We're talking Christmas trees with Eric Baker of Baker Garden and Gift, and we're going to talk about Christmas trees and the F word, flocking. So what tell us, what is flocking? I mean, I think we have an idea, but what all goes into it?
Well, flocking is a technique in which you take a fresh cut Christmas tree. In our case, we put a wooden stand on there that stays on the tree. You don't have to take that off. And so there's a process in which we take a white substance that's kind of made out of some wood cellulose. It's a natural-based product and colorized white. And then it has essentially kind of a dried Elmer's glue, consistency of it. And it gets put into a machine that, makes it turn very fast, and then it shoots out kind of like a reverse of a vacuum cleaner, and it gets spread onto the tree, not unlike like drifted snow.
Okay.
And during that process, there's water introduced to it. So in a certain sense, we're kind of preserving that tree with a white substance that kind of looks like a frost.
Okay.
And there's different degrees of that, so that you can flock them kind of heavy or flock them kind of light. But it technically has an anti-flame kind of retardant kind of property, just the way it works. You know what I mean? So if you had a bone dry tree and that got ignited with no flock, that would go up in a hurry. And a flock tree that's completely bone dry, you know what I mean? It does smolder. In fact, if you put a flame underneath it, it doesn't ignite right away. Anything will burn, I guess, eventually. But the beauty of these trees is that, commercial companies, that you can't have a real tree. This one is kind of a go-between that. You know what I mean? So you don't actually put water on it, like what we talked about earlier, and they will last. If you don't move them, for months.
Because that flocking really seals in the moisture, doesn't it? So there's less moisture being transpired out. And so that's why they don't need to be taken off, or shouldn't be taken off the wooden stand or put in water. They remain on that wooden stand. The flocking seals in all the moisture. And the one thing I love about the flock trees is, like you mentioned, it can be just a light flocking that looks like a frosty morning, or it can be heavier, so it looks like a new snowfall.
What about colors? You were saying white, but I would imagine that you can mix in colors.
Yeah, so just like a painter, there's pigments that we can blend and almost any colors available, including black. And for a number of years, black was our most popular color other than white. And typically it was always the same customers that would get a black Christmas tree.
Why do you think that why black?
Well, we ask our customers, and one lady in particular was like, "Oh, I have a whole bunch of silver and glass ornaments," and it just really highlights her collection of.
So it's really just kind of like more of having a backdrop, so that the items can really pop off of it. Oh, so it's kind of a show. Oh, very nice.
And for some other people, I think we did one for a automotive shop, and I think they just like the novelty of having a black Christmas tree.
Yeah.
So there's different motivation, to do that. We've fooled around with colors in the past. I had one lady bring a carpet sample in and said, "Can you make something of this tone?"
To match.
To match, yeah.
Wow.
Flock to match on that one. A few years back, I did a couple ombre, kind of, fade from one color to another color. Okay. It's been a while since, I had one gentleman came in and he wanted a tribute to a family member that had passed, and it was military, and I remember, if you can imagine draping an American flag over a tree,
okay,
but it would be colorized like that. So it's not an actual flag on the tree, but it's
red, white, and blue.
Red, white, and blue, and some stripes. And
have you ever done a camouflage tree?
No, that would be something
for the hunters in the group.
I've done a blaze orange one.
Really?
Oh, really?
Oh,
wow.
Was that for a hunter, or was that just or a safety?
Somebody who worked on the highway department.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't need to know.
How about, so we're here in bison country, how about green and gold?
That would be awesome. I could get behind that.
Yeah, and then we've done a lot of green and gold, yes. A lot of double swirls, double helix, kind of, there's, and it's, a lot of people just allow us to do our own thing. We get some inspiration from them. But yeah, no, I've done quite a number of different trees. The red and white, which is kind of a candy stripe one, that was actually kind of neat too. But
you ever do a purple one for a Prince fan or a Vikings fan?
Oh, I've done. Oh, yes, we've definitely done Vikings ones. Yep.
Okay.
And that's that color match is pretty distinctive.
How about this year with the all of the hype and praise around the movie Barbie? Do you think that you'll be getting many pink requests?
Pink is probably the second most popular color. And so the industry, our industry has, the flocking industry has like there's only about 12 colors, right? Basic colors. And their version of pink is, I'll be honest, it's a real Pepto-Bismol pink, and I'm not a big fan of it. So then I have to take that and kind of tone it down.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll add some red into it, just like mixing paint. And, dark pink, light pink. Everybody has a different opinion of the degrees of that, So, yeah,
have you seen like with so I'm sure, when did flocking come into existence, do you think?
The interesting thing, that's an old school technology. I mean, even I'll be honest, the companies that produce it, one company is based out of Minneapolis and just recently had been sold to a company down in Colorado. So now it all comes more or less from Colorado. But even the packaging on the bag feels like it's from the 70s, So I'm going to say early 60s, is when it got developed. And
so I'm wondering if you saw a shift in that, as more artificial trees came out and were being sold, in different places, if the number of flocking went down, or is it flocking always stayed the same?
No, there was definitely a peak in the 70s, 80s. I remember at work, I think they had in the warehouse area where they would make these, prepare these trees to be flocked. They'd always kind of keep a score of, year by year, So it was interesting to see, some years it would, 500-600 flock trees, which is a lot. Those numbers have nominalized, and I think in the last 5 years we've stuck about the same, same number. But no, the interesting thing is I wonder if the industry did take a little bit of hit once the artificial trees became popular, especially ones that pre-lit. And of course, there's always that frustration level of, one light goes out, they all go out, So I wonder if there's a resurgence of getting other trees at that point. But now there's LED lights, and, that's another nice safety factor. They don't warm up as much as the old-fashioned traditional lights. But,
and that is a good point, Eric, because, when I was a kid, we bought our spruce tree from the Texas gas station, but then there was a very violent fire in Lisbon caused by electric lights igniting a Christmas tree. And then my dad was really concerned. So then he went to the Coast to Coast store, and then we had an artificial tree that looked more like the toilet brush. Yeah, that I talked about. But then at least we could have electric lights on that. But they were also the bigger bulbs that were kind of hot, but the tree wasn't flammable. But you mentioned the LED lights, and I love that, the coolness of those, because we're very conscious about not letting the lights get warm on our real tree. And so we switched to LED also. So it's a good move. It helps the safety factor.
Yeah.
Plus a well, getting back to the keeping it moist, because a well-hydrated Christmas tree will not entertain a flame. There's been lots of research done on that, purposely trying to get this tree to flame up. And if it's well hydrated, it won't. But of course, if they dry out, they can. But that's why LED just gives such a much more margin of safety to a real tree, live tree.
So I'm sure people ask you this all the time, but since Christmas trees are such a big part of your business now, what kind of a Christmas tree do you bring home? Like, do you bring your office home to you as far as that? Or what kind of a tree do you put in your house?
I always bring home a Fraser fir, and sometimes it's a natural one. Sometimes it's a colorized one. I think we had a holiday party a number of years ago, and we went with turquoise.
Okay.
Had kind of a theme there for that party, and
I think I remember an upside down Christmas tree once.
Oh yeah, yep. So it's amazing what you can put together when you can flock it, and it's kind of like artists, You can materialize almost anything if you put your mind to it.
Needed a little extra support, but What about some other things like outside of the house, like to do outside? Tree toppers seem like they've kind of caught on over the last 10, 20 years or so, or not tree toppers, but the things that you put in pots outside in your front yard or something like that, the spruce tops or some things like that.
Yes, and that's a kind of upper Midwest regional thing. If you go to the East Coast or West Coast, people will do greens, but a lot of times people will say, well, spruce tops, quick factoid here, a lot of people think of spruce tops as like the top of a large, tall tree, and they're actually a form of black spruce, typically harvested in northern Minnesota. These black spruce are native species that are growing in kind of a bog or slough type scenario, and interesting enough, when you buy a little tree topper that looks like a little miniature spruce tree, that if you count the rings on that thing, that's going to be 5, 6, 7 years old just for that little 3-foot, miniature tree. So yes, people will spruce up their outside of their houses, and it's a nice way. Some people that can't have a a tree inside, natural one, if they put that outside their house, what have you. There's a little bit of a tie off with that because it's a natural product, and of course, they're sustainable. The state of Minnesota, regulates that. They're not just being raised off the land. So there's very ecologically minded industry. They're looking out for the long haul for all the things that are harvested.
So now does a spruce top always come off the top of a tree, or sometimes some of the side branches of a tree kind of look like they could be up at the top? Follow me?
Yeah.
So I wonder, are they always off the actual top, or can some of the lateral branches kind of look like?
Yeah, they can kind of go that direction. I mean,
I've often been curious. Are they actually off the top, or?
I don't know.
No, I mean, so the black spruce, they're just like, growing right from the ground, so.
They just pull up the whole thing?
Yep, they just harvest the whole thing right to the ground, And they pick, it sounds like they don't clear cut the field. They just pick ones that look nice.
Oh, sure. So in that case, it is kind of actually the whole little
tree.
Yep. Yeah,
so it's a mini tree, basically.
Now, as you can imagine, there's probably tall ones out there, and if they have side branches, they might harvest that as well.
Because I've seen some bundles of kind of shorter that are kind of called spruce tops, but they're shorter.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes
and
people refer to those as spruce, tips, and it's the black spruce.
Sure.
And they might be like shaved off
maybe
the
some
side
laterals.
Of, ones that are really tall that, of course, no one would buy a 12-foot of that, but because it would be a very spindly tree. But no, spruce tops are more and more popular, it's people have fun with that, because it's a lot of times they'll buy, it's tactile, you go home and, you're done with your annuals for the year, and then you have this pot. And then, of course, what a great transition is to introduce that, there is a school of thought that some people will put a fresh cut even on those, stick those into the soil. And I'll generally add a little bit of water to some of them, as long as make sure your pot is not clay, and in a worriment of that, it might flash freeze and then break that. So if it's a poly pot or plastic pot that has the ability to maybe take some freeze thawing, you could recommend that. Other people will put it into a pot, freeze it up, and then set that pot inside of their pot outside their house. You know what I mean? So container gardening has become, more and more popular, and this is just an extension of that. Something to do with your containers during the wintertime.
How about things like garlands? Are there what do you recommend, or what should people know if they're going to buy garlands? Especially because would you buy the same garland that you would put inside your house as you would put outside your house?
There's a balsam fir is a traditional one that you see a lot here.
Those are longer needles?
Nope, those are the softer needled, and the fragrant. They just seem to be they're kind of a flat needled branch, and it's an easy one to tie up into this machine that makes the garland. This year we're actually selling Fraser fir garland. So
nice.
It's a little different look to it.
Balsam garland is a little lighter green, maybe not quite as full.
And, you can still find white pine garland. I mean, there's a number of things and there's mixed garland, where they have thrown in a bunch of other things. But it's a very long, just kind of a steel wire that they, wind. And back in the day, they do it by hand. You still could probably do it by hand. But they have a machine that will wind the very, very small wire to hold the branches in there. And it's kind of the same process in which they, doing like a wreath. I'll mention that as well. Yeah. And you can have a Fraser, balsam. You don't see too many pine or spruce wreaths, But as another side note, I noticed lately we've been having a lot of people asking us about wilt-proof or a product called No Wilt. And that's a anti-desiccant that's made out of pine resin. And it's a natural product. And what you can do is you can spray that onto an evergreen. You can protect evergreens, spruce and pine. It's not recommended for arborvitaes. But if you had a boxwood wreath or something that you bought and you really wanted to hold the moisture, this is kind of like putting a fresh cut on a Christmas tree. You can buy some wilt proof, which is you mist it on, and then it's almost like suntan lotion. Just a little bit goes a long way. You might have to reapply it. But the key is that you have to do it while it's not freezing.
Sure, and it'll hold the moisture then into the evergreen.
Locks it in, yeah.
Locks it in,
and
sure.
It's and technically you could do that inside your house for a Christmas tree, but again, most likely not. I think it's, where you get in front of your, between two doors, there's a glass window or something, and things heat up, or if you did a mantelpiece or something. And
yeah, I could see that on a mantelpiece, where the garland that you string on a mantelpiece, you're not able to give it water, it's not in water, so it's going to dry out quicker. So the wilt proof applied to that would help seal the moisture in.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's, it's the primary use of that product is to protect your newly planted spruce or pine,
from winter burn,
junipers,
I suppose.
Yeah,
sure.
Winter burn, yeah. And that works really well. Of course, you have to go out there before it's freezing.
Right.
You have to do that beforehand. So.
I know that Baker you do a lot of classes throughout the year, and I think you probably do some wreath classes. I'm assuming that you probably have some coming up, some wreath making classes or some other kind of garden container decorating, holiday container decorating classes, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people are, the mindful part of plants, which we all know, extends into the Christmas season as well. You know what I mean? It's just the act of, putting stuff together and doing it yourself. And then, bringing those, home. So we do have a number of seminars that are ongoing. I'm always amazed how creative sometimes they get, make things make it look like a gnome or, kissing balls, which is a sphere that you put into, it look like you have an orb of branches. You would hang it high, and of course, underneath it you would
smooch your honey.
Do you sell mistletoe?
Occasionally we do.
I don't. Yeah.
We, the real stuff looks so, it's preserved, and even though it's natural, it's symbolic. I think in the concept of it, I think most people are successful by buying up maybe an artificial kind of twig of it because, that is a plant that's kind of a noxious weed at times.
Well, yeah, and because live mistletoe isn't as it kind of isn't as picturesque as what you might vision in your head.
Yeah.
So, yeah, mistletoe isn't quite as decorative as the paintings or photos or pictures kind of depict. So,
if people are interested in those classes, probably the best place to look is on the Baker Garden and Gift Facebook page and look under the upcoming events and see what's coming up and what people may be interested in buying or interested in checking out.
And good time to shop for Christmas gifts for gardeners. I love giving hints on things to buy me. Okay. Garden. And
now you've got
things.
A whole platform to do that.
Yeah, I do.
Well, Eric, thanks a lot for coming in today. I'm sure this is kind of a busy season for you, so I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks for being here, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Yeah, great. Well, Don, if people have questions for you about either on trees or any kind of gardening things related, or if they want to find out what's on your Christmas list, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinzler, Kinzler, at ndsu.edu.
And pictures. Let's talk about pictures.
I love photos.
You love getting in photos. Let's say
both the good and the bad.
Yeah, but if people have let's say containers, if they're doing spruce tops or something like that in their containers,
that'd be fun.
Send us in that, and we'll put those up on our Instagram page.
Great.
That'll be great. It'll be great through the holidays to get some of that stuff up.
Super.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you next week.
Yep, and have a great week, everyone. And Eric, thanks again for joining us.
Happy holidays.